get the word core. Courage comes from the Latin word core, which means it's the heart of the matter. It's what really makes you move, stand, tick, make decisions. That's what courage is. It's what moves you. It's the foundation of your life. One of the greatest books I have in my library is the 1828 version of the dictionary. I think it's the first version that came out by Daniel Webster. And what's interesting about that volume of books is that every word that was defined in 1828, he has a scriptural reference to it. He has a Bible reference to all the words that were used in the early 1800s. And here's what he says is courage. It's the quality of mind that enables men and women to encounter danger and difficulty with boldness and with firmness, without fear or a depressed spirit. The quality of mind that enables men and women to encounter danger and difficulty with boldness and firmness, without fear or a depressed spirit. And at the bottom of that definition, he has these words: be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in danger of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. God will never leave you or forsake you. I think we need to pray for God in these days and in this present hour to give us personal courage. Amen. We need it for the things that we're facing in our nation and the world. And let me give you three times that you're going to need courage. Now, there's many more than that, but I don't have time. There's three ways. And the first time you need courage is when you're facing a difficult assignment. Now, Joshua 1:9 is really the story of Joshua taking over the reins from Moses. Now, Moses was a rock star in the Old Testament. God had put his hand on this man to lead hundreds of thousands of people out of the desert, out from the hands of an oppressive regime, and even on the banks of the Red Sea, when he's got over 600,000 whiners behind him, he's got two mountain obstacles to the left and the right, a major water obstacle in front of him, the entire Egyptian army with the Pharaoh behind him. And even there, God says, take courage. Take a knee. The battle's not yours. It's the Lord's. The scripture says something about Moses, that he was so awesome. I mean, we're talking a water walker. We're talking literally a water walker. We're talking a top block. I mean, he had an above center of mass performance report. The scripture says no one has been like Moses, who was humble and even saw the face of God. And then the scripture says in Joshua 1:9, and now Joshua, it's your turn. Have you ever followed one of those folks in an assignment that you may not even feel qualified for? They've done it all right. They've written history books on it. And now how God works, now it's your turn. What do you do in those moments? You need courage. Because you never know when that tough, that hard, that difficult, that challenging assignment is going to hit your zip code. It's going to knock on your door, and you're the one that's now in charge or dealing with that tough assignment. Maybe it's a military position. There's some tough leadership requirements for today's leaders. I mean, this is a challenging, changing culture. Maybe it's a tough law enforcement assignment. You've got the most difficult area where you are required to patrol. Maybe it's a challenging relationship. I mean, after you said I do at the altar, it's like all hell broke loose. Maybe it's a health challenge. That's an assignment sometimes. If you believe in the sovereignty of God, that everything is under God's care and management from the A to Z, from Alpha to Omega. If you believe that God is in charge of the heavens and the earth, which I do believe, we have to look to Him in these times of tough assignments. Let me give you an example. One of the toughest assignments I had was back in 2010. It was July of 2010. Our first chaplain assistant was killed in action since Vietnam. 40 years had passed before we'd had a chaplain assistant to be killed. And I remember having that tough assignment while I was in the Pentagon to call his widow and to give her my condolences and the condolences of the Army, as now she's a widow with three little girls that she would be raising for the rest of her life. And it was less than a month later that I had to make another phone call to a chaplain's wife. Chaplain Dale Getz was killed in action about a month later, and almost in the same location that the chaplain assistant had, east of Kandahar, almost the same place. And his bride, Christy Getz, would now be raising 3 boys by herself. And I remember when I called her, it was really a tough call, and she was telling me about what happened when that black government sedan pulled up outside her quarters near Fort Carson, Colorado. And she remembered first thinking that they've got the wrong house and maybe they're asking for directions, and yet when they continued to knock at the door and give her the news that her husband, Dale, had been killed in action, she says, I dropped to my knees, and the first thing that came out of my mouth was a scripture from the book of Job. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And she told me, she says, when I rose up from my knees, I realized that I had a new assignment from God. As a widow, all of us have that unplanned news that knocks on our door when we least expect it, and that's when we need to cry out to God for courage to endure, to be resilient, to persevere. Travis Mills' life changed in April of 2012, just short of his 25th birthday. Staff Sergeant Travis Mills was a member of the 2nd of the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg on his 3rd deployment, this time to Iraq. He went on the 3rd deployment. He volunteered because as a young 25-year-old mature man, he said, I've got to go downrange and be with my boys. He'd only been in country for a few days, and they were doing a search mission in a small village, and he laid down his ruck right on top of an IED. And in a moment, his life changed. He lost both of his arms and his legs. One of 5 quadruple amputees that we have in our armed services. He said the next time he really became cognizant, after, by the way, he continued to bark orders as a leader to take care of the other troops who were bleeding and dying. He remembers waking up at Walter Reed, no arms and no legs, wondering if his wife would leave him now that he was just a trunk. Wondering if his little 3-year-old daughter would look at her daddy as a monster. He said in his book, Tough as They Come, he said, if I'd had hands, I would have choked myself. I would have killed myself. I would have committed suicide. Who wants to live like this? He looked on the nightstand and he said somebody had put a scripture reference, probably the chaplain, put a Bible verse there for him, and he wanted to curse the chaplain and maybe choke his neck. He didn't look at that note for several days until finally he read it. And it was his life verse, a verse that he had sealed in his heart long ago. Is Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be dismayed or frightened, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Travis Mills realized at that moment, and even today, he has a new assignment. He lives in Maine now. He and his foundation bought the cosmetic giant Elizabeth Arden's mansion, where he now ministers hope and healing and encouragement and courage to his fellow amputees who are looking for purpose and how they're going to make this new assignment in their lives. So, my brothers and sisters, I challenge you this morning, as you are facing that assignment that seems too big for you, cry out to God for your help in that time of need. Ask God, pray for courage, not only for yourself, but for our leaders, for your battle buddies, for our nation's leadership. Secondly, we need courage when we're trying to figure out the strategy for an operation or the plan for our life. Joshua is kind of given some wisdom from God. God says, I want you to take this Holy Scripture. I want you to meditate on it day and night. I don't want it to ever leave your brain. You need to keep it close to you, because if you follow it, if you follow your Holy Scriptures, there's a plan for your life that will guarantee success. I would just ask you quickly, what inspirational words are you looking to guide and to guard and to direct your life towards success? There's a lot of fly-by-night philosophy that is out there. But I would just challenge you, and again from a Christian, a God-fearing perspective, I believe that these scriptures that we have are the word of life. They're unchanging. They're without error. They're inspiring. They work. There's even scripture that says, hey, take one of these scriptures and test it and see if it doesn't work. I'll give you an example. Dr. Jeff Orge is president of the Gateway Seminary in Ontario, California. Great speaker. I mean, that's what he does for a living. Several years ago, he developed cancer of the larynx. Well, if you have cancer of the larynx, that sort of shoots the speaking circuit. He went in to see his docs, and they basically said they have to take this tumor out, because if it stays, it's going to spread. The only problem is, if we take the cancer out, you could lose your vocal cords, you could lose your speaking ability. But you have to assume this risk, which he did. When he awakened from his surgery, they also told him that it may do something to your muscles. He could not move. He was paralyzed for several hours, actually overnight. And he says as he laid there in the bed and cried out to God for help, for courage. Here's this theologian who had spent his entire life studying God's Word. He said, that night I could only remember one verse out of all the verses in the Bible. And it was Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And he said, all night long I kept praying, God, I'm afraid. I'm crying. I don't know if I'm going to even be able to move again. But I believe your word where you tell me that joy is going to come in the morning. And he claimed that. And the next morning his voice returned, his muscles came back, and he continues to speak. I share that scripture with you because sometimes when we need guidance for our plan, for that, as we have this assignment, where we're going, what's the strategy? In many cases, you've got it right before you. We're just not reading it. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is to have technical manuals and field manuals, sort of like we do in the military. Nobody reads them.